Go. Good evening, everybody. Great to have everyone for this really interesting series. I'm sure it will be. I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background on Dr. Aaron Weissman, who is going to be our lecturer for the next 6 weeks minus one. He's not next. Let's see, Aaron, November 18th, you're not doing it. But other than that, it's 6 consecutive weeks. So
no, next week.
Next week. Okay, sorry. Yeah. All right. So next week you're not going to be here, but then after that it'll be 5 more weeks.
Yeah, you added another one at the end.
Right. Okay. All right. So Dr. Aaron Weissman is the executive director of the Inland and Desert Hillel. He earned his master's degree in Jewish education at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And in 2014, he completed his doctoral degree in educational leadership at the University of California, Davis. Between 2006 and 2018, he served as a school educator and administrator. He's lectured at numerous national conferences and academic programs and has extensive knowledge and experience in the fields of educational leadership, student services, organizational change, and Jewish learning. And last year, he did a series on learning about Israel through Israeli movies. So that was really interesting. And so I'm sure tonight will be equally interesting. So I will pass it over to Dr. Weissman.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi. I taught this class at UCR Osher, and I recognize some of the students, so it will be a very similar class. I did add a little bit more information when I get more closer to explaining King David and King Solomon in Jerusalem. But it is based on the class that I taught at Osher. So if I sound if it's the same, if you feel that you're in the same class again, feel free to log off and join us in lesson 4 or 5.
Well, actually, Jane Beitcher says the class is so good it's worth taking again. So I think that's what everybody feels here.
Thank you, Jane. So yeah, I work now. I'm the executive director of Inland and Desert Hillel, which actually located, my office is located at UCR. But we are providing services to students all around Riverside and San Bernardino counties. So we provide them with educational, social, and of course spiritual and religious activities and programs, which is something very, very important to do with the younger generation. We have to keep them connected with Judaism, also connected with their community. So I feel lucky to do this job at UC Riverside and other schools in the region. One thing that the rabbi didn't mention, yes, I worked mainly in education, but I was teaching Bible and history for a long time, different age levels. And one of the things that I did, one of my shticks is to learn more about history about the region that I used to live in. I grew up in Israel, and when I lived in Israel, I also participated in 2 archaeological excavations, one in Jerusalem, and I will talk about it later, not today, but in session 4 or 5, and one dig that I attended and participated for a week or 2 in the city of Bet Shean. And I will show even pictures from that area, which we found this kind of a house, a mansion of an Egyptian governor in Bet Shean, in Israel, in the north of Israel. So I will talk about it more later. So this course is combining all of this history and archaeology. Now, when Rabbi Singer invited me to teach this class, I told her it's a little bit tricky because even though it's a part of a synagogue program, and I will talk and I will try to bring some theories that will debunk a lot of the theology that our religion is based on, especially the literature and the Holy Scripture, the Bible, the Torah. So it is a little bit tricky, but I will focus mainly on history, archaeology, literature, linguistic analysis of the Torah, and some other books from the Bible, and no theology. Even though there will be some kind of I will touch a little bit about theology, but I'm not going to base it on theology. And what I ask you to do when you come to my class is try to shake the theology away, because yes, the Bible is it's a central literature of our theology, our faith, but it is. But it is actually also, if you have to understand that it's also, you can look at it as an historical document.
Aaron, can I just say that I have absolutely no problem with what you're doing. Obviously, I wouldn't have asked you to do this, but I always tell people there's a difference between fact and truth. So the Bible might not be factual, but it has truth in it. So that's how I reconcile what you're doing.
Okay, interesting perspective. It doesn't work with our politics in the United States. Okay? Anyhow, I finished three books actually that was written by Yuval Noah Harari, who is a very well-known Israeli writer who wrote a brief history of mankind, which is about the Homo sapiens. Those of you who love history and love theology, is talking about that, and he's talking about how we actually look at the different. We can look at different literature, like the Bible, in different perspectives. And there was a reason why they wrote the text. There was a reason why the text was written, and I will talk about it today. The text also gives us a kind of an indication of what happened in the Middle East at the time, and what are the geopolitical movements in the entire Middle East that basically chase us all the way, hunt us all the way to today. All the arguments that we have today about the land of Israel, who was there first, and sometimes is who cares. But it is actually, we are using it, the Muslims using it, the Christians using our Bible, and the Jewish text. Zoom is very tricky. I was teaching this class in the first time I was teaching this class actually at the Bureau of Jewish Education in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was in person in a class. So Zoom is a little bit tricky. If you have a question, I will give you some times to ask the question, because when what I see now, it's my face on the computer on the screen, but I would love to see all of you. And if you have any questions, so from time to time, I will have a break and you can ask any questions. And I have to tell you, it's also tricky because of the dynamic. I don't know your previous knowledge about the text, and I will talk about the text. And I don't, so I'm like an educator, I assume nothing. So if I say something that you don't understand, please write down the question and ask me to clarify. And if you never heard about this story from the Bible, you can stop me and I can explain. So I basically assume nothing. So
Aaron, if you want to
yes.
see everybody, go to gallery view.
Yes, but if I present my presentation,
then you'll see a strip of people on the side.
Yeah, you're right. So let's. I will share now my. I will share. Who can share? Host. It says that only host can. Yeah, okay. Wait a second. Yeah.
I made you co-host. Is that not?
Yeah. You got it. I got it. Okay. So I hope that everybody can see. So we will meet on Thursdays at between 6 and 7, except for next Thursday, and to the end of the last session will be at the end of the week. So some of the sources that I will use for this course is, of course, like I said, archaeological digs, everything that was with things that were found in Egypt, mainly in Egypt, a little bit Mesopotamia, definitely in Israel, in ancient cities, in shrines, in all the temples, and this is something that I will use a lot. Any other finding that they found in Israel and in Egypt today, in the last, let's say, 20-25 years, they use a lot of carbon-14, which is gives you a very, very close indication of all the way up to like 50 years, even sometimes even close. Depends on the sample that they actually collect from the ground of plants and any organic thing that they can actually find in order to do the carbon-14. So this is something that we'll talk about as well. And of course, looking at the Bible, and I will talk, of course, when I say look at the Bible text, what I will try to do is I will focus first on the Torah. However, the Bible, starting after the Torah, from the book of Judges all the way to the book of Chronicles, this is where the facts on the ground are starting to synchronize with the text. And so the text can actually gives us something more of kind of a historical, it becomes more an historical text. I'm talking about the book of, I'm sorry, the sections of Nevi'im, which is the prophets, and the Ketubim, which is the writing. Even though Ketubim is a selection of many, many books. Let's talk a little bit about archaeology. Archaeology is it's a tricky science, and because it's based on what we find. If we don't find it, we have to fill in the blank, and it's a kind of building a puzzle when you have missing pieces. And when you have missing pieces, you try to build some kind of a theory based on the pieces that you do have. So archaeology is very tricky, and I will talk about it, the flaws of archaeology, but about the things that they did find on different sites in the Middle East. One of the things I listened to a podcast about a year ago about what kind of things archaeologists will discover about us today in 2021. Okay, will they remember COVID-19? Will they remember whatever, they will remember anything, but think about it, our houses, even if my house will be demolished or will be covered as a kind of a mound, and people will start digging and will find my house, they probably will think that only for my girls' rooms, they will think that Harry Potter was a god. There was a creature named Harry Potter, and people used to ride on a broomstick and do some sorcerer stuff, And how can we worship a guy the name is Harry Potter? Because my daughter has posters and all his books and his wands and many other things. Now, Harry Potter most likely won't be remembered in 1,000 years. Maybe they will remember there was a book of Harry Potter, and think about all the pictures that we have. This will be gone too. Everything, the technology moves very fast, and if we save it on our hard drive, it doesn't mean that it will be in a kind of I'm sorry, the archaeologists at the year of 3000 will be able to decipher, will be able actually to pull the information from the old ancient computers. So this is something that we do today. What we do today, we're looking at things that they were found in Israel and in Egypt, from 3,500 years ago, from 4,000 years ago, and we try to understand what was. Of course, it's much more simple societies. In some ways they are complicated, but in some ways they are very simple, not like ours today, that we have nations and we have different races and so on and so on, and we are spread all around the world. But this is something archaeology. So archaeology is based on, there are two schools of archaeology. The maximalist scholars that assume that the Bible story is more or less correct, unless we prove that it's not. Okay, so this is actually, they take the biblical text as as a very major, as a very important text to use as part of archaeology. And you have, on the other end, you have the minimalists that assume that the Bible story is actually fiction. And we have to, and has to be, the archaeology will help make the fiction truth, a fact. Okay, so in Israel, if you look at these two schools of thought, in Israel, you will find more maximalists in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and of course in the University of Bar Ilan, which is it's a religious university in Ramat Gan, and you will find more of the minimalists in Haifa and Tel Aviv. One of the most famous archaeologists today, and he's like the #1 voice of archaeologists in Israel today, is Israel Finkelstein, and Israel Finkelstein is from Tel Aviv. Yuval Ne'eman, which is another archaeologist, is from Jerusalem. So there's always some kind of disagreement between the two schools, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the Hebrew University and the Tel Aviv University. Some of the things that we will discuss, you can see papyrus, a piece of papyrus on the left side, and this is kind of a stela that was found, and you can see that the pictography of the Egyptian writing on both, which is very interesting. I just read it's something that they found out many years ago, but I read that the testing that young ladies or even older ladies can take today of peeing, and can find out on this stick if they are pregnant. Yes, apparently there's a papyrus that was found from 3,500 years ago that says that the Egyptian use urine as well to detect if the woman is pregnant. And we're even more sophisticated. They even found out that, at least according to their to their theory, I don't know if it actually was in practice, they found out the gender of the baby. So they had a sack of barley and a sack of wheat, and they asked the woman to pee on both of them. And if the barley actually, if there was no what do you call it, plant coming out, growing up from any of the sacks, so it means that she's not pregnant. But if a plant was from the barley, coming growing from the barley, so it's a boy. If it's from the wheat, it's a girl. The question is, what happens if it's from the wheat and from the barley? I didn't get that piece of it, but it's very interesting to see that even it was something that the Egyptians were curious about how to detect if a woman is pregnant or not, and what kind of a gender. So this is, you find it in different in papyruses, in Egyptian papyruses, and this is more Hebrew and Aramaic. Ancient Hebrew on the right side. On the left side is a piece from famous one of the thousands of pieces that they found in the different caves in the Dead Sea, what's called Dead Sea Scrolls, and they found it it's a fascinating story. So interesting to read how they found it and how they actually they missed a lot of opportunity there because they found it in the 1940s. But the Bedouin actually found it in the 1940s. Didn't want to sell it to an Israeli archaeologist, and they sold it after it was already exposed for 20 years, and it was well preserved. And when it started to be exposed to the humidity, then it started to fall apart. On the right side, I can basically, Hebrew is my first language. I can actually read it, and maybe the Rabbi can actually figure it out as well. Here, for example, here it says Shevet meIsrael. So it does, the letters looks very similar to the Hebrew letters. Some of them are not similar. They're not, and but you can figure it out. It's kind of, if I take an English word and I will drop a letter, you can figure it out here. For example, here the word leolam, and what other words I recognize here. So you can fill in the blank on neum, amar, neum, and so on and so on. Shomea, El is the name for God, and so on and so on. So this is kind of the evolution of the Hebrew writing from this kind of writing to this kind of writing, and of course the fonts that we use today, which is it can be very similar to this, but this is something else that we'll talk about different writing and different languages that they use in the area. And I will talk about, mainly I will focus on the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and some of the prophets, the Nevi'im, the Joshua story, the Judges story, Samuel 1st and 2nd, and King 1st and 2nd. I won't get much all the way to Isaiah and Jeremiah, but I will touch a little bit because Jeremiah actually lived in the period of time that they wrote the Bible. And if I'm talking about writing the Bible, in order to really understand if the story is true or not, we have to look who wrote it, why they wrote it, when, and try to say, you know what, if the Torah was written by these writers at this time, what does it mean about the text? So very important. First, there is the theory of 4 to 5 writers, and this is this theory started in the last, in late 19th century, and it was kind of an idea of I think it was a German, I believe it was a German. It
was Wellhausen, I think, right?
Who?
Wellhausen?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. So he basically the theory was just a theory for a few decades, and then it started to actually, the more they discovered, the more they actually studied the text and the genre of the text and the different styles of the writing of the text. They found out that actually the writers, there are about 4 major writers, and some people actually said there are 5 major writers, and I will explain in a second. First, there's the E writer, and the letter E comes from the word El or Elohim, okay, which is a name for God, the way that we name God in the Torah, in the Bible. And eventually the E writers came from the Norse kingdom of Israel, when Israel was split between Judea and Israel. Okay, at one point in history, the united kingdom of Israel and Judea was split after the death of King Solomon. And the Israelites had the writer E. The south writer from Judea, we call him J, not because of Judea, because of the name of God, and the name of God is Yud He Vav He, which is in English it's Jehovah or Yahweh, one of the, it depends on which translation you read. Jehovah, we have it. Also, the English translation is very tricky, and there are dozens of them of English translation of the Bible. And when I taught, actually, I told her that I taught the Bible in Phoenix. Some people brought different translation of the Bible, and when I asked different students to read a specific one or two verses from a specific book, it was amazing to see how they are translated differently between one translation to another. So this is why I'm here, and I will read to you from the original text, which is the Bible. It is in Hebrew, sorry. We have the D writer, and the D writer is the entire book of Deuteronomy was written by the D writer, which is also related to the south of Israel. And we have here's the two writers. Some actually look at the book of Leviticus as one writer. Some divided it in two different writers. The writer P, which is the Kohen, which the chapters 1 to 16 talk about all the laws of the Kohanim, of the priests. And the word P is actually from the word priest, the Kohen. And from chapter 17 to chapter 27, you have the writer H, which is holiness, the Kedusha. The word Kaddish, for example, come from the same root. Kiddush, so Kedusha, the holiness, and this is a bunch of laws between a man and a fellow man, and a man to God. So you have again the priesthood, the section of the priesthood and the laws for the priest, and also the second part of it is all kinds of laws that make us holy or make us a holy nation. So this is the two different writers. The academia look at it as some would tell you there are only 4 writers. So they refer to the Leviticus as the P writer, and some will say that it's E, J, D, and 2 others, which is the P and the H. So be that as it may, it doesn't matter, but you can see how they actually divided the text between the different writers. And you can see it very well when you look at, the different style of writing, and I will give you a few examples. These are the few examples that I'm going to give you. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, which is the story of creation. There are 2 stories of creation. Usually we focus on the first story of creation with Genesis 1, which is God created the world in 7 days. In 6 days, and the 7th days he actually he rested. This is why we have Shabbat, the day of rest. And we will talk about Genesis 6 versus Genesis 7 and Genesis 17 and 18. So let's look at, I'm just going to show you the difference between E and J so you can understand. And you can see it for yourself why the researchers, why the scholarship thinks that there are 2 different writers, which is very simple, okay? When I write, by the way, I highlighted, you can see in bold the word God. When I said the word God, it's in English, but in Hebrew it's the word Elohim, okay? Elohim start with E, okay? Or the word El start with the letter E, and it's also something that you will see in the Bible when the kingdom is actually divided. The kings from the north will have El in their name. The king from the south will have the Yud A in their name. For example, there was a prime minister. He's not a king. There was a prime minister, Netanyahu. Okay, his name is Netanyahu. The Yahu, the suffix of his name, is God. Netanyahu is a gift from God. But in the north, he came from the south. In the north, it will be Nathaniel, okay, which is the same thing. Basically, it's the same word. Nathaniel, it's a gift from God. So we have the first story of creation, chapter 1. Let us make. And I underlined, and I forgot to underline us. let us make men in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the all earth, and the creeping things that creeps on earth. Now, this is very tricky because the Hebrew basically said, and in Hebrew is very easy to identify as singular and plural. So here we have actually the word, by the way, the word Elohim itself, the word Elohim, the im suffix of the word makes it a plural name. So Elohim himself, the God, says that he actually referred to himself as our, and in plural. When we move to the writer, this is the writer E. And the next verse is said, and God created the man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, we created them together. Now, when we move to the writer J, and chapter 2, only a few verses from the next chapter, we have a different kind of story. Okay, such is the story of heaven and earth that they were when they were created, when Lord God, okay, which is Adonai Elohim, it's the word that's Adonai, or again in English is Yahweh or Jehovah, made earth and heaven, and here we have a kind of different creation of the man. Of man, he actually, and God Lord created man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostril, and the birth of life, and the man became a living being. You can see that, by the way, in the first story, the first creation story, you have female and male were created together, and the second, the God, which not God, I'm sorry, Yahweh, so that God is as lonely, and he took a rib while he was sleeping. He took one of his ribs and he created a woman for him. So here you see two stories of creation from two different writers, and I will tell you more about how come they actually ended up, both of them, in the book in the Torah. But here's just one example. The next example is the writer E. The writer said, this is the story of Noah. Everybody knows the story of Noah, and it says, and all of that lives. Noah is a little bit tricky. The story of Noah, you don't have one chapter is talking about from the writer E, and another chapter from a writer J. In this case, the editors of the Bible, much later, of the Torah, they actually edited the stories together. So it's very confusing. If you really read and you try to understand the story of Noah, it's very confusing. The measurements are different between the two writers, the measurement of the ark. Different instructions are different, and then you ask yourself, why is it different? Why is it? And then you have to go back. You have to go back to the E and the J writers. Okay, so here's the E writer. It says that you should take two of each into the ark to keep alive, and should be male and female. Okay, makes sense. We have to. This is the story that we tell every child in Jewish preschool. And the bird of every kind, the cattle of every kinds of the creeping things on earth, two of each. Okay, so we know it's two of each. Now we go to the J writer. The J writer says every clean animal you should take 7 pairs, male and their mates, and every animal that is not clean, 2, male and its mate. Okay, now it's not exactly 2. Now we have the number 7. And the birds, the bird in the sky also 7 pair, male and female, to keep the seed alive upon all there. So this is what, of course, when you look at interpreters of and definitely classical interpretation of the text, people will tell you, of course, Orthodox will tell you that the laws of of kashrut is there, and the clean, you have to take kosher food, but we know that kosher food was not was not there during the story of Noah. It came much later, and not it's actually the laws of kashrut is actually came much later by hundreds of years later, and I'm sorry, thousands of years later. So I have a question here. Maybe it's a question. These writers were definitely male. Not possibly that they would consider God as anything but male. You're right. God is always referred as male, and like I said, verbs in Hebrew are male and female. Adjectives male and female. So everything that is referred to God is actually referred to him. There are some verses that you see kind of a nuance of the text, or maybe implying that God is actually has a different gender, but 99.9% of the biblical texts refer to God as a male God. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Next chapter is the story of Isaac. The news about Isaac is before Isaac was born. In chapter 17, we have the writer E, and we know that it's the writer E because the name of God, is Elohim. Nevertheless, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. Okay, and so on and so on. We know that this is in chapter 17. Next chapter, I'm sorry, but my covenant will be maintained. Will be maintained with Isaac. Sarah shall bear to you in this season next year. Next chapter, we have a different writer, the writer J. Writer J, and this is something very interesting. If you read the story, you will see that the writer that God Himself, Yudei Vavei, came to visit because it talks about two people plus one. Okay, and this is again I don't know if you see it in the translation, but in Hebrew it's very clear. Then one said, "I will return to you." Here, God referred to him as to himself as in first person, and your wife shall have a son. Okay, and Sarah listened to at the entrance of the tent, and so here's that two kind of news from God. One is chapter 17. Another one, chapter 18. It's either Sarah and Abraham didn't talk with each other after he met him, the chapter 17, so he didn't tell her about the news, because here she is surprised. So this is just I gave you three examples. A very interesting example that I don't know if Rabbi Singer ever referred to it when during high holidays we read the Akedah, which is the sacrifice of Isaac, that was not sacrificed eventually. But the Akedah, if you read the Akedah very closely, the story of sacrifice of Isaac, you see the big difference between the J and the E. Again, it's like the story of Noah, that the two stories are actually melded together, mixed together. But the God that was challenged Abraham and sent him to Mount Moriah is Elohim, is the E-writer. The God that actually stopped the sacrifice and told him that you stop, you don't kill your own son, is Yudei Vavei, is Adonai. We say it in Hebrew Adonai because we don't read the Yudei Vavei. So this is a God that is demanding, the God that is furious, the God that is has a lot of expectations from the people of Israel, compared to the merciful, compassionate God of the J God. The J God is more compassionate in the stories than actually the E God. Two different gods. maybe eventually we now believe that it's the same God, but it explain why in the period of, I didn't bring the text, maybe next time, in this specific moment that he has to spare the life of Isaac, it's actually turned into the Jacob. Some indication that the text was written in different locations is also was written way later, and I will tell you when the text was written. So we see that even the text itself gives us an indication to that. So in Genesis 26, he named it Sheba before. Therefore, the name of the city is Beer Sheva, to this day. When the word to this day, it means that the text was written much, much later. Okay. Now, of course, people believe that Moses wrote the text. This is why it says to this day, because Moses wrote the text many, many years after Genesis 26. This is why the children of Israel, this is after Jacob and the angel of God, or whatever, an anonymous person were wrestling through the night. It says that if this was the people of Israel, to this day, do not eat the thigh maso, and that is on the socket of the ear, because Jacob was injured in this specific area of his body. But we know that the laws are of food, of what kind of food we eat, became much, much later. And it says here very clear, very explicitly, to this day. So we know the text was written much later. And then this is, of course, the biggest mystery. Who wrote the last few verses of the book of Deuteronomy? People, of course, even classical, more traditional interpretation, like even Rashi or the Ram or the Maimonides, whoever interpreted this text, they believe that Joshua wrote the last few verses, because how come, after the death of Moses, he cannot write anything? And it says that Moses, this is referred to Moses, he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, near Bet Peor, and no one actually knows the burial place to this day. Okay, and this is the last few verses of Deuteronomy. And now we actually move to Joshua. Okay, and but the Judite could not dispose of the Jebusite that inhabited Jerusalem. So the Judite dwelled together with the Jebusite in Jerusalem to this day. Now, the Jebusites were eventually, Jerusalem will be conquered by, or part of Jerusalem will be conquered by King David. And King David couldn't actually ask the Jebusite to stay. And it says that the Jebusite actually dwell in Jerusalem with King David at the time in Jerusalem. So we know that the book of Joshua was written much, much later, because we know that during the period of time that it was written, the Jebusites were actually dwelling together with the Judite in Jerusalem. Let me see if I really needed to, just to prove you that the text was written. Yeah, names, different names in the Bible. We know that Jacob, after he had this dream, he named the place Bethel. Bethel, we know there are archaeological digs in the area of Bethel, and we know that Bethel was actually a city that was created over ruin of another city, which actually we see the name of the city here, the city Luz, okay, that was a Canaanite city. And Bethel, that was an Israelite city, was built over the city Luz. And here in the Bible, and this happened way, way, way later, if we believe in the story of Jacob, way later, when the Israelites started to conquer the land of Israel and started to settle over the ruins of the previous nation, which is different tribes of the Canaanites. So we know that Jacob is not the one that called it Bethel. Bethel was called by another person many years after Jacob. If Jacob was still, if we believe that Jacob was a real person. Genesis 12. Here we have another contradiction in the story. If we know that Jacob actually named Bethel in Genesis 28, think about it. What is it? 16 chapters before that. Okay, we have a story of Abraham. Okay, who pitched a tent at Bethel. Okay, wait a second. So is Bethel a city that Abraham created, or the Bethel is the city that that his grandson created? The 16 chapters later. So here we have this contradiction in the text, and we know that Bethel and our different archaeological digs they dated Bethel as not all the way to what we believe as Abraham or even Jacob. So now when I showed you who wrote the Bible, and I saw that we have many questions in the chat, I will address it maybe I should address it now. Hold on. Let's have a break for a second. Okay, so I have everything open here. So the e writing is the older. Okay, is the e writer is the older? Yes, the e writers are actually older. And when the Assyrian came and conquered basically conquered Israel, the Norse kingdom, they took with them whatever they wrote in the Norse and took it actually to J. And I will explain this process maybe in a few minutes. Yes, the E writers are a little bit older than the J writers. What is the significance of 7? Numbers in the Bible are, it's called, there's a name for this. I forgot, there is actually a term, what is it? So the Bible, yes, Numbers 7, 40, okay, the number 40. We know that the numbers are insignificant because the numbers in the Bible, especially in the Torah, Moses lived all the way to the age of 120. Abraham, I think he was 175 or something like this. Noah was 900 years old. Okay, so we know that the numbers are insignificant. And we know that basically says, if we see a number 900, if we see number 40, it means a long time. And this is how archaeologists actually look at it. Archaeologists in this turn look at the numbers as everything. We have a lot of 40, 40 days of rain in the flood, 40 years of traveling through the desert, 40 years David ruled as a king, 40 years Solomon ruled as a king, and 40 and 40 and 40. I think there are 104, 100, I wrote it down somewhere, 140 something times in the Bible that the number 40, number 146 times, yes. We have number 146 times that the Bible says the number 40 means a lot of time, okay? Did the E and the J writer in the same period? There is overlap, but like I mentioned before, the E writer is more likely is older, not by much, by a few decades than actually the J writer. Okay. And number, Rabbi, you wrote actually the J is the earliest, so I believe.
Well, I said later there must be some controversy over it because I have material that says that it's older. So I'm sure it's not everybody agreeing on it.
Yeah, so there are, because of recent writing that they found in the north of Israel. When I say recent, it's from let's say from the early 1990s, the last 30 something years. It is actually, it's still controversial. It's not exactly, but it makes there's more now it's more clear to some researchers that actually the rewriter is older. But I don't know how well known it is. How is it Isaac how is it Isaac will have offspring if is to be sacrificed by Abraham? Okay, based on so the biggest question on this question is, was there any Abraham or Isaac? And the answer, according to research, is no. This character will not exist. There's no evidence whatsoever there was a guy named Abraham. There is a name Abraham, and it was known as a name in Mesopotamia. So yes, it's a kind of an ancient name. And there were some indication in writings from Mesopotamia, very old writing, that the name Abraham was a very well known. Was Jacob a real person? This is something that I will talk very soon. Okay. Jay was a female scribe. One argument. I don't know. We don't know the gender of the writer, but most likely they were men. Okay. And there must be controversy over which older, the J or the E. Okay, but this is what Rabbi we just discussed it. So let me close that. And I saw somebody raise their hand. Close that. Somebody raised their hand. I didn't see who. Or maybe we should. Yeah, Carl. Oh, Carl is hiding in the woods. Okay. In the background. Yes, please, Carl.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's Carl and Jenny. And
Jenny, hi.
Yeah, Jenny, hi. Going back to your original definitions of the maximalist approach and the minimalist approach about the Bible is more or less true versus fiction, I was wondering if there was sort of a compromise or an intermediate position where things in the Bible sort of contain like maybe a nucleus of truth, so the details, may not be sort of true or factual, but there's something referred to that is reasonably sort of true. And I was wondering if there was this intermediate position, and if there is, what is it called?
There is. Over the years, the minimalist and the maximalist became a spectrum. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area, and because every few years we find something, we have new things that are found. Okay. But every few years, all of a sudden, maximalists will say, "Oh, gee, wow, we found something that debunk everything that I believed in." And even Israel Finkelstein, who was very skeptical about the biblical text, he had excavation the recent years, I think from 2015, that he found what we believe is Kiryat Yearim, which is the area that they kept, because he has a lot of doubts about the United Kingdom, the kingdom of David and the kingdom of Solomon. Was it that great, especially during the time of Solomon? So he tried for years to say that Solomon was not such a great king and didn't rule whatever the Bible said. Even the Bible contradicts the territory that he ruled, but he found some evidence on the road between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv today. He found a mound, and he actually started to dig. There's a church monastery on the top of the mound, and he found actually some evidence that this is the place that they kept the tabernacle, the Aron, what do you call it, Aron HaKodesh, what held the what do you call it, the tablets. So this is he believes that it's from there, and it was stolen from there, and there are some evidence that it was an holy place. So he actually now leaning, from a person that was really anti-Solomon, he is leaning more to be on the spectrum to the not the maximalist. I don't think he would call himself maximalist, but more to the center. Yes. So there is it's a spectrum today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's continue with the presentation. When was it written? I gave you the answers of today. What is the most the mainstream academia look at about the different writers. Now the question is, when was it written? So the belief is, the belief that it started in the early 8th century BC, and the reason for that is that sorry, let's open all of this. Okay, the reason for that there were no writing from the 9th century BC. And for example, the prophets, the prophets that were from the 8th century BC and the 7th century BC, like Amos and Micah and Isaiah and Jeremiah. Jeremiah actually came much later, but these prophets actually wrote their prophecies in first person, or they had a writer with them who actually wrote the prophecy. But prophets like Elijah and Elisha were one of the first prophets in the 9th century. All the stories were actually is written in third person. The stories of Elijah and Elisha, and it's actually their stories. They don't have their own books. The story of Elijah and Elisha is in the Kings, the second book of Kings. Especially during the kingdom, Elijah was during the kingdom of Ahav, was a well-known king of the north, and there were prophets in the north of Israel. But this is actually, as the Bible proves us, that there are that as a biblical text, that the writing actually started a little bit later. On the ground, they found only writing and more artifacts like these two pictures that I included in this slide, that were written and were dated to the 8th century BC. If they wrote something in the 9th century BC, the writing was very limited, very primitive, a sentence here or a sentence there, but not a letter, or not something that you can write a text. For example, the piece of writing that you see on the right, the small piece on the right, it's a correspondence between a soldier and his commander. Okay, not something significant, not like we went and we conquered Egypt or something like this. It's just an exchange of writing between a soldier and his commander. That you see that the writing became more and more popular and more spread during the 9th century, and definitely the 8th century, and definitely during the 7th century. And even the different techniques and tools that they use for writing improved over the years. And of course, the writing itself, the letters and the way that you write the letters, improved over the years, which is it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So that it's the transformation between writing like the Egyptian used to write, that the pictography, to the writing, the development of letters and the development of the combination of letters as a word. And you have to teach the writing, and you have to make it available for people. And it took hundreds of years to do that. It took about 150 to 200 years to make the writing very spread around. Of course, the spoken language was there, but putting on a piece of, here you see the stone, they wrote it on different stones. It took decades to do that. So very rarely you find something that was dated as a 9th century, 10th century, even of course, definitely not over the 10th century. But they did find some clay from the time of David, for example, the time of Solomon, that you see a word or two words or a few words together, kind of creating a sentence, but not something that you have a text. So it started at the early 8th century BC, and the writing continued all the way. The writing of the Bible was continued all the way to the time that the Judea exiled all the way to Babylon, and this is where they put all the text together. And the editing didn't happen in the land of Israel. The editing happened in Bavel, in Babylon, during the Babylon Exodus, when the Judean moved what now is Persia. Oh, I'm sorry, now it's Iran, but it later became Persia and the empire, the Persian Empire. We know that here just they found a lot of writing artifacts from the 8th century, but almost none, actually almost zero from the 9th century. Now we know that from the Bible itself, in the book of Nehemiah. I hope that I have some time. Let's see. Oh, it's already 7. Let me finish this point. It's very important. From the book of Nehemiah, we know that the Bible was edited later, much later, and was not introduced to the people of Israel only until they came back during King Cyrus of Persia. He led the Nehemiah and Ezra and Nehemiah. These are 2 books in the Bible, and this is at the year of 457 BC. You're talking about hundreds of years after the text was written. If the text was started to be written in the 8th century, you're talking about 400 years later. The entire people assembled one man in a square. This is actually where I will start touching a little bit of theology. I told you there will be some overlap. Before the square of the water gate, and they asked Ezra, the scribe, okay, this is Ezra the Sofer, Ezra the scribe, to bring the scroll of teaching of Moses, in which the Lord has charged them. Okay, this is the first time in history that the people of Israel are actually listening to the story of the Torah in the year of 457. The Torah was not written before that. It was written before that, but it was edited. It was not actually widespread. The first day of the 7 days of the month, Ezra the priest was teaching before the congregation, men and women, and they were who could listen and understand. He read from it, facing the square before the water gate, from the first light until midday. The men and women, those who could understand the ear of our people, and give this and were given to the scroll of the teaching. And listen to this. This is something that you do in a synagogue today. Ezra opened the scroll, and we know that we open the scroll in the synagogue, and for the sight of people, and it was above all people. This is a bima that we have this stage that we have in almost every synagogue. And he opened that, and the people stood up. This is exactly what we do today when we open the Torah in the bima. And he praised the Lord, and he said, he praised the Lord, and he blessed the Lord. We have the blessing, Baruch hu et Adonai Vorach, and the entire congregation said, Amen, Amen, with their hands, and they bowed. Okay, you remember the Baruch hu et Adonai Vorach, we bow to the Torah. So here's kind of this is the source of what we're actually now practicing in our own synagogue. But it started, the first time that it started in the year of 457, when the Nehemiah came back and they rebuilt the Holy Temple. This is the second Holy Temple. And this is also an indication that the first time that the Torah was introduced to the congregation, to the people, was much later in the 5th century BC. Okay, now I'm going to take a break here. So we talked about who, we talked about when, and the biggest question, of course, is why. And we will try to figure it out in the next few weeks. Why was the Bible was written, and why is it so important that such an important text that we are still reading it every week in the Torah portion. So I will stop sharing here. Stop. Here we go. Oh, no stop video. Oh, gee, how do I stop sharing here?
Isn't there a bar on the top? Oh, there you go.
I got it. Yeah. Okay. So I have a few things on the side here on the what is known about the sociology of the literacy. We'll talk about it in the next few weeks. The idea of the soldiers who would be able to write. Basically, the sociology is you see that even the simplest soldier can actually communicate with his commander. Okay, and this is actually it's a letter that he sent to his commander. It was not like right next to him. The commander sat elsewhere, and they found it. I don't remember exactly where they found it, but they found it. It's a kind of a exchange of letters, let's say. So, and the parallel of the part of Genesis to Gilgamesh, of course, we know that there's actually stories before Genesis that are from Mesopotamia, that some stories were adapted by different people in different traditions. So you see, we always see in sociology that the exchange of cultural things. We see it even today. We live in a global world, and at the time the global world was the Middle East, but now we are stealing from this culture and we are eating from that culture. We have Chinese food in America and we have Italian food in China. So it's something that was always a part of our history of taking some cultural aspects from other nations and adapt it. The entire Greek mythology, there are many stories that are very similar to stories from the Bible. The entire stories of, not the entire story, but many parts of the New Testament. The story of the birth of John by Elizabeth. Come on, it's the same story from Samson. It's almost exactly the same story. Yeah, so again, the angels come to tell the mother Elizabeth that she will have a son because she couldn't. How many women we have in the Bible that are cannot carry a baby? It's like from Hannah to Samson's mother to Sarah to Rachel, and so on and so on. And it continued in the New Testament with Elizabeth. So,
Can you take a couple questions before?
Yes, of course. Let's have some questions.
Carl and Jenny, did you have your hand up again, or was that from before?
Oh, it's from.
I can't hear you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's from before. I have another question, but I can hold it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, okay. I guess I was also, I guess I've read that when you have the God of, or God's attributes of mercy and justice, that may reflect sort of an evolution in the idea of God, that there were different gods. And so sort of those attributes of one God of mercy, one God of justice sort of merged into one God with both traits or more traits. And again, sort of a reflection of just, the evolution of the understanding of God.
Yes, we always think, again, this is something that is agreed by the minimalist and maximalist as well. We always think that the Jews are the one who invented monotheism, but the things that they found on the ground in different cities in Israel, different ancient cities. And one of them is Bethel, for example. I just mentioned Bethel a few minutes ago. That they found sculptures. They found the image of God and different images of God. And the belief is that yes, there was more than one God. Eventually, these gods were merged into one God. And but it came much later. But during the time, again, it's the exchange of culture. They lived in a region when all the nations and all the tribes around them believed in multiple gods. Some gods had different attributes, and they borrowed these attributes and added to the text. So yeah, so I can bring up, maybe for next session, I can bring some of the images of God that were found. Some of them are small, some of them are larger, in some shrines in different locations in Israel during the time that supposedly the Israelites or the Judaite actually were supposedly believed in one God.
Yeah, it was a brilliant synthesis.
Yeah.
Are there other questions? Anybody have a question? Well, if not, I would like to thank Aaron, Dr. Weissman, for a very informative and revealing session. I would like to dedicate the study that we just did to Dr. Arnie Geller, whose birthday is today. So Ruth,
Mazel tov.
think of you. And also, we bring you these programs, they do cost us some money. So if you'd like to make a donation, there is a place on our website, the TBE Riv Temple Bethel Riverside website, where you can click and make a donation of any amount. Would be totally appreciated. So thank you so much. We will not see Dr. Weissman next week, but we'll see him the week after, same time, same place.
Yes, and again, if you have any questions between the sessions, write it down and we can start the next session with a few questions. But I see that I used to teach this class about an hour and 15, another 20 minutes. Maybe we need a few minutes after.
Yeah, it seems like that's exactly how long it took, an hour.
Okay, I don't mind to stay. If you don't mind, I don't mind to stay for 10, 15 minutes after 7 o'clock. Okay.
We appreciate that very much. That's very generous.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Okay, you're welcome.